All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing very, very well. Today, I am with Dana. Dana, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing quite well. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a chat about, a little bit of a chat, bit of an interview, something in between, about Canadian English and American English. But before we jump into that, I mean, Dana, tell us a little bit about you. Like, I understand you teach English, and what dialect of English do you teach?
Well, I teach Canadian English. I'm Canadian. So I got into specifically teaching Canadian, English with a Canadian twist, I guess, because it's still English, because a lot of my students were coming to me because they were planning to immigrate to Canada and they wanted to speak to a Canadian. They wanted to hear my accent. They wanted to talk to me about Canadian culture. And some of my students were saying to me, there is nobody making YouTube videos. There's no one online that is there to teach us, Canadian English. And they said, could you maybe make some YouTube videos for us? And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll try. And then I did. And then people were watching them. And then I got kind of more involved on Instagram and Facebook, and I built a website. So I'm building kind of an online little community. And a lot of the people that are watching my content are interested in eventually moving to Canada for work or study, and hoping to settle down there.
Now, I'm curious as to why our students, I mean, maybe you know the answer, maybe not, but I'm curious as to why people wanted videos specifically about Canadian English and why they didn't, quote unquote, settle for American English videos or videos that talked about American English, because, we'll get into this more in detail later, but for all intents and purposes, they are quite similar.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think that students like the variety. And, I guess for myself, if I was learning Spanish, for example, and I was moving to a certain country, I would definitely want to be hearing from someone. Like if I was moving to Chile, for example, I would want some content from someone in Chile. I think that would create a bridge for me, a connection between, where my goals are and where I want to get to. So I think that's why they're so interested in Canadian English.
No, I want to take it back. I mean, you said that you started to make the videos because people were asking you about it. What were you doing before you're teaching English?
Before I was teaching English, I studied science at college. I didn't like the lab, and then I went into marketing. So I have a little bit of a background all over the place. And then it's when I moved to Brazil is when I started teaching English. It was a really great experience. There aren't a lot of native English speakers living and teaching in Brazil. So it was really great to connect with students and to be able to give them a different approach of teaching, because in Brazil, they teach English a little differently, and the language skills aren't really at the standard you'd see in other countries. So it was really great to do that. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I think that's something that's really interesting. I've noticed too, as I've traveled to different places, is that there's different concepts of what effective teaching is, depending on region, depending on school, teacher, depending on, age even. What were some of the main themes you noticed that maybe were different than what you're used to when you were looking at the teaching style where you were in Brazil?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people in Brazil are learning with someone who also speaks Portuguese. So there is a lot of translation going on and a lot of conversation that happens. And because, I'm still not fluent, I'm learning Portuguese, but, often my student could speak better English than I could speak in Portuguese. We were forced to have conversations in English, and you can really give them a communicative approach to learning English, learning through conversation, learning through talking about situations. And that's something that they hadn't really experienced before, unless they had found a teacher in Brazil who focused on that method.
Interesting. That's really cool. So transitioning a little bit, one thing I find really interesting about when we look at Canadian and American English is, often when I talk to, for example, an American, usually pretty quickly, I know that they're not Canadian
Mm-hmm.
and they know that I'm not American. Even if we're in America, if we're in Canada, depending on, like, usually pretty quickly we can tell. However, if we take someone from basically any other country and we put the American and Canadian side by side, they would go, "You sound the same," like in terms of accent and how you sound.
Absolutely. Like when I was living in Ireland, I consistently got asked where in America I was from,
Mm-hmm.
which drove me crazy, but that's for another video. But you're dead right. Like there is a huge distinction. And I think the major distinction that people hear is the OU sound. There is something distinctive in the way that Canadians say, and I'll say the word about, these types of words, house, people can hear the difference immediately, I think. And we get
So what is the difference between a lot of the OU words?
It's our pronunciation. It's Canadians use what is called the Canadian rising, and I'm sure you've heard of this before. It's a pronunciation where the place of where our tongue sits in our mouth determines how those two vowels sound together. So, about, it's really hard for us to do and to explain. Like, I don't think I could say that word like an American would, but there is a difference.
Yeah. And I think, like, my understanding is that it's more open, and I don't think I can imitate it perfectly, but my understanding, and I'm curious on if you think I'm doing it well or not, is that Canadian, for example, if we take the word about, which is the kind of the stereotypical word that people look at, like, or even like house, for example, like the word, we might say house in Canada versus something in America, at least my understanding. And this is two Canadians talking about it. It'd be cool if we had a third person who was American and we could bring them in. But anyway, that'll be for another day. My understanding is in the States, it sounds something closer to maybe house versus house versus house. Like, one feels more open to me.
Yeah, it's like another word where you can, we're more stronger with the O would be like sorry. And like instantly you can hear Americans will say sorry.
Yeah.
So, and it's a little bit more closed from the American side and more open with the Canadians with sorry, like strong O's.
Right. Interesting. So, and actually one thing that's interesting about the States that I think doesn't get talked about super often is that you get different accents in different regions. Like, obviously you have the quote unquote standard American English, that standard accent, similar enough to how we are speaking right now. But then you also get different things. Like if you go to, maybe Louisiana, you're going to get a very different English than if you go to even, if you go to like, trying to think of another one, like if you went to
Texas.
Like Texas, or if you went to, or if you went to like even Boston's got a little bit of a slightly different twang to it, or different feel to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting for people to understand that you and I are speaking very similarly. I think our accent, is quite similar, but we grew up 7,000 kilometers apart from each other. So I think that's something that's unique about Canadian English is like the uniformity across such a vast country. Like we do have areas where there is an accent, like in Newfoundland, and the Atlantic provinces, they sound a bit different. And obviously French speakers will have a different accent, but for the most part, I don't think that you can really hear a huge difference.
Well, I think even that alone, if we look at that, that's interesting. That, I think most people don't even know this, that in Canada, it is pretty uniform. However, we do have, you just said kind of how we speak. You get a French Canadian English who might be perfectly fluent in English, and yet they have a slightly different accent. You have definitely Newfoundland. That's a completely different accent, almost closer to, it reminds me of an Irish accent, if anything. And this is an interesting phenomenon. I'm curious if you, I'm curious if this is just me or not. I feel like the further east you go in Canada, the stronger and the more variety of different accents you would hear that sound different than American. And yet the further west you go in Canada, the less variety you might hear in the accents. Is that something you've noticed? It's something I've thought about before.
Yeah, I don't know if it's mainly because there's such a huge population in Ontario, like that's where most, you know, Canadians are living. Like the majority compared to all the other provinces are living, you know, in Ontario. So I don't know if that has something like an influence on it. And because there's different voices, different, you know, people aren't necessarily like in Toronto, there's a huge number of people who aren't speaking English as a first language. So, you know, you do get like just different pronunciation due to that.
Right, for sure. So, you know, we were talking before about some of the different accent differences. We talked about these OU, words with an OU, right? I mean, are there other sounds that you're aware of or other types of words or things that happen in pronunciation apart from these OU words?
Yeah, I would say there are like, but I would say there's more like of a vocabulary difference and things that Canadians say all the time as just part of our dialogue that Americans don't use. Like there's tons of words that we have that Americans don't have. And there's expressions like, of course, Canadians use the term a lot. And it's kind of like an opinion gathering thing or just to make a statement. And in the US, it would sound more like huh. So I could say it's cold outside, eh? And you're supposed to say, yeah, it is, right? Or just say nothing. And that little tag at the end of a sentence is unique to Canada.
For sure. Yeah, I think that A is definitely a big one. In the States, isn't using more of huh? I've never thought about what the tag is in America. Yeah,
I would say like, oh, it's hot out, huh? Or like, I think they use that a little bit, at least maybe in like, you know, the New York region, the East Coast. But again, you could never generalize the US because earlier, like there's different accents, different ways of speaking across the whole. But I remember even as like a child going down into the States and like you could hear it instantly that they weren't Canadians, which was pretty cool.
And I think in terms of vocabulary, I think one of the things that stands out to me is there's one specific word that I remember from my one cousin who lives in California, and he would use the word hella, like, oh, that's hella cool, or that's hella whatever. And I remember thinking when I first heard it, I was like, what does that mean? Like, what is the word? I was like, it must mean very. And that is what it means. But it was such a novel concept to go, you know, oh, hella means very. Like it was so, because it sounds like the word hell, which is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like some songs made that like popular enough that it did get mainstream. But like we do have words that like slang words that we use, like giver.
Right.
Which I don't think that they use like in the US at all. And giver is like, it's kind of like a word of encouragement, and it has a lot to do with like younger people and maybe, you know, drinking or partying. So you'd like giver on a night out. And so that means you're gonna.
It reminds me like it reminds me of the Spanish. I mean, I'm just saying this because I know I have a lot of Spanish list watchers. It reminds me of like the Spanish word dale. It's kind of what it reminds me of. But anyway, it's a different topic. I think as well, like in Canada, I think, you know, we have words like loony and toony, which don't come up in the States.
No, and people think that those are like the most hilarious words.
Yeah.
They're just so like, you know, and people even use them in marketing. Like, I don't know, do you remember KFC used to do like Toonie Tuesdays? So you could get like, a box of chicken and fries for like, 2 Toonie Tuesdays.
So what is a loony and a toonie for people? Because I think most people won't know what those are.
Yeah, so a loony is a $1 coin and a toonie is a $2 coin. And like, I remember when they took away the $2 bill and they were naming this new coin. And I don't know, like it made sense to call it a toonie to rhyme it with loony, but I just think that's
why is it a loony? Do you know?
A loon on the back.
And what is a loon? I think we have non-English speakers. What is a loon?
It's a bird.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're very rare to see. I've seen.
They actually are, yeah.
I've only seen a couple loons, and it's kind of a big deal. Usually, you have to be in a cottage, like you know, in the middle of nowhere to see a loon.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to think, like, do you know any other vocabulary differences? Because I know we have more. I'm trying to think of like myself as well. Do you know any others?
toque, of course. A toque is a hat
yeah,
where and this is like a word we actually use. Like I would never say like, where is my winter hat? Or like Americans call them beanies.
Yeah.
I would always just say like, put your toque on, it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And I think
there's lots of other words like we name our alcohol a little bit differently. Yeah, there's different vocab for like a 2-4 is a 24 pack of beer. A Mickey is like a small flask of alcohol. So I don't know. It kind of reminds me that a lot of these terms must have come from kind of a rural setting or something.
And that's exactly what to go, is that a lot of our slang feel like it sounds very rural. Like it sounds like when you hear it, you're like, oh, like when he's like, oh, giver. Like it's like to me in my brain, like I would never say that.
Yeah.
Because it just feels too country kind of language to me. And it doesn't feel like
and that there is a rural accent in Canada, like a very distinct rural accent. And if you're interested, there's a show. It's called Letterkenny Boys, I think is the name of it. And it's about a small town, Ontario, kind of group of friends. And they're nearly impossible to understand.
What was it called again?
Letterkenny. I think it's called Letterkenny Boys.
I'm gonna look it up right now. Letterkenny. Oh yeah, Letterkenny. Yes, Letterkenny problems. It looked like Letterkenny Boys or Letterkenny.
Yeah, so they started on YouTube, and then they got picked up by a kind of like a digital streaming platform.
Right.
That's popular in Canada, I think, and they have this very rural Ontario accent and way of speaking. And
there's another one. I don't know if they're actually from Calgary. I'm gonna find it right now. They don't talk about language related things. It's an Instagram account. I'm gonna actually find it right now as we talk, because it's so good. And it's like this is like it's almost like the stereotypical like hockey player or the stereotypical country like Canadian, like I guess countryside accent. I'm not sure how many people exactly talk like that. Who are those hockey players? I'm gonna find it. Players on Instagram from Calgary. I think they're from Calgary.
I think, like, it's interesting. This doesn't have anything to do with Canadian vocabulary, but it does kind of reflect on Canadian culture, is that being so close to the United States, we've always felt like, you know, the younger sibling that never got any attention. So Canadians are very into, like there's a huge space online for people who want to create Canadian content. I think that Canadians are always interested when someone's talking about them, kind of have this need for attention, if you will. So a lot of my videos, it's really funny, a lot of my videos that are there to teach, you know, non-English speakers about English are getting watched by Canadians. I have a huge audience that are watching in Canada, which is, I find hilarious, because I'm not making this content at all with Canadians in mind. The only Canadians I have in mind are the ones that can't speak English.
Right.
So it's super interesting.
Nice. I found the Instagram. It's on.the.bench. So on.the.bench on Instagram. And it's Canada's most unreliable sports broadcast team, starring, and then they have, it's anyway, if you ever want to hear like that stereotypical Canadian accent.
They've got a lot of followers, so.
What's that?
They have a lot of followers on Instagram. So like I said, like, you know, I think that there is a space online for Canadians to fill and entertain each other.
For sure. Last thing we'll talk about before we finish off is a lot of the Canadian slang associated with a specific coffee shop, which is Tim Hortons.
Yes.
So, talk to us a little bit about that. What is Tim Hortons like? What are some of the slang terms we have with it?
Tim Hortons is a donut and coffee shop in Canada, and it is like, I would say, quintessential Canadian. Like, it's huge here. Like, you can have a Tim Hortons that is literally diagonally located or across the street from another Tim Hortons. We are like borderline addicted to Tim Hortons. Like, They serve coffee and donuts and like other treats. They've expanded their menu, but like you said, the vocabulary has integrated into like the way we speak. So if you go to Tim Hortons and you get a double, you know, you could say to someone, I could say to you, like, can you get me a double? And like every single Canadian will know exactly what you want. You want a coffee with 2 cream and 2 sugar. And like, I think that's hilarious because it is. It's just part of what we know.
Yeah. And even like things like roll up the rim to win. Like that is
win. Yeah, of course. Like this is a contest that you know, you like it turns everybody in Canada into like gambling addicts because I think people drink way more coffee. Everyone's walking around a little wired because you know, you can win a car, a bicycle, a trip, and most of the time you just end up winning another coffee or a donut.
Yeah. And it's like basically like for basically everyone watching this, 'cause I don't think there's many Canadians who watch me, but it's basically like on the coffee cup, you roll up, like you like basically roll up the rim, and like it'll like there's writing on it that'll tell you if you won or not. It's very similar to like on the bottle of on the bottom of bottle caps. Sometimes you have like the free, you know, free Pepsi or free whatever. Sometimes you get those. It's very similar to that, except you actually roll up the rim of the cup, and it's like a big.
No, it's really fun. And then of course there's Timbits. So Timbits are donut holes. But I don't think any Canadian road trip is complete without a box of Timbits. And then everybody has like their favorites and the ones that they hate. And like nobody likes old fashioned because they're the worst Timbits. So
what do they call Timbits in the States? I'm not really sure.
I think they're called donut holes.
They're called donut holes?
I think so, yeah. Do they sell Timbits?
Yeah, I'm just quickly looking on Wikipedia. Apparently, donut holes is what Wikipedia says. So, I mean, I'll assume that's correct. Yeah, donut holes. Yeah, I found 2 sites that say donut holes. The 3rd site, yeah, it looks like that's pretty common.
But I would say Timbits have become like a brand within themselves. Like they sponsor a lot of hockey.
Yeah, Timbits hockey.
Yeah, that like these are the little leagues. So this is when you have like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds playing hockey. They'll be on a team called the Timbits, which is like adorable in itself. And a lot of like famous Canadian NHL players got their hockey career started being a Timbit. So it's kind of cute.
Yeah. So I think overall, like it sounds, and you know, if we had to summarize it, and I'm curious to hear if you agree or not, it sounds like to me like 95% the dialects are very similar. You look at American, you look at Canadian, like most, you know, when you look at a standard, quote unquote, standard Canadian, quote unquote, standard American accent, or dialect, excuse me, they're basically the same. But then when you go super narrow into it, you start to get a couple of different distinctive properties that can distinguish the two. Is that?
Yeah, I would say that that's true. I mean, obviously, depending on where you are in the United States, you'll have like a greater difference between the two. But in terms of like, aside from the spelling, which we didn't touch, but we can definitely another time. If you're reading from an American book versus a Canadian book, you're not really going to see too much of a difference. If you're listening to at least along the border, like in New York and a lot of those border states, the accent's going to be pretty similar, so you won't hear a huge difference either.
Yeah, it's actually on the spelling side. I mean, we can touch on it very quickly. So I think it's important. It's like, I guess, what are some of the spelling things? Yeah,
so like Canadian spelling is a like weird hybrid between American and British spelling. So we'll add use to words like honor and favor and color, but then when we look at other words, we'll retain like a Z. So like in realize, I can't think of another one off the top of my head. Summarize. These will all be words that will have a Z to them. And then like there's some very technical differences. I have a YouTube video that I made about it. So if people want to like watch that one, I went through and like delved deep into this whole spelling situation.
And I think I wasn't planning on finishing it, but you brought up another one I think unconsciously, the last letter of the alphabet. In Canada, it's Z.
It's
but
Z.
But America, it's Z.
Z. But I always find this one funny is that we say Z, but we say zebra. And in British, like the British pronunciation, it's a zebra.
Right.
Which kind of follows more of like the Z property. And I would say, and this is probably happening to like the younger generation, like, you know, the younger kids, teenagers now probably are starting to say Z instead of Z.
Interesting.
Because I get a lot, again, like, you know, Canadians watching my YouTube, I get a lot of comments saying like, I don't say Z, I say Z. And I'm assuming these people are probably younger and are maybe influenced a little bit by the American culture.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is the actual final thing now, but it just occurred to me, and this will be the final thing. Because we're going for 25 minutes. So finally, actual final thing will be, it just occurred to me that the differences between, you know, American and Canadian English remind me of the difference of how a language might be spoken, even in two different cities within the same country. Because at the end of the day, they sound very similar, but even if you were to take, you know, go in one country, the States, Canada, any country, and you go really deep into the culture of two different cities, you're going to find language differences. Like, it'd be like if I went to, even trying to think of a good example, it would be like if I'm trying to think, I wish this occurred to me earlier and I like prepared like a good example for it. But even actually, here's one. This is something I noticed. I wrote it down when we did that video on your channel. You said a zebra crossing or a zebra crossing, right? Is that like, I would never say that.
But the thing is like, I think like I've spent a lot of time living outside of Canada.
Interesting.
And it's funny. Like, I mean, when I used to live in Ireland, I would go back and people were like, you have an Irish accent. Because, and it's interesting because where you live and who you're talking to, like, hugely influences the way you sound. And like now when I call my friends in Ireland, they're like, have you been talking to anyone from Canada recently? Because you sound so Canadian. And I'm like, well, it's because I'm not in Ireland. Like, and I'm not, you know, taking that. So it's going away, but like there was a little while there where I had this like really confusing accent. But yeah, zebra crossing is definitely like a British thing. I think we would just call it, we don't really have it. So
we call it a crosswalk, wouldn't we?
Yeah, the crosswalk, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we call it. But I thought of an example. It's like, for example, in my city, we have something called, if I told you, hey, I'm going to the Dome, it probably wouldn't make sense to you, right?
No.
Because it's such a like local thing. And I think that's kind of what the differences remind me of between the US and Canada, is it reminds me of like local differences in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because you'd find similar differences within local, like different cities, the same way you'd find Canada and US, even though it sounds at first listen quite similar. That's kind of what came to mind. But
yeah, there is a few things like, because I like, this is what I do and I'm interested in it. You know, I've delved into a little bit, like certain words that I say, like I say bagel, and like,
interesting. Okay.
You would probably say
bagel.
Yeah. Like, so, and like everybody in London where I'm from says, well, not everybody, but a lot of people say bagel. So you might have those like tiny itty bitty.
Right. How do you say the word, like the white liquid that comes from cows?
I'd say milk.
Yeah. So that's another one. You say milk, I say milk.
Yeah.
Right. Slight difference.
I think people would have to like replay that one to hear the difference. I say milk with like an E and you say
milk with like an
milk. Yeah. But I might say milk from time to time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I have an interesting one for you. And I just have to ask you this question because it's been on my mind. The past of like when you take something somewhere, to someone's house. And so this is like a verb that starts with a B.
Yes.
How do you say it? Like
in the past?
Yeah.
Like I brought, blah, 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 blah.
Do you always use brought, or do you ever say that you brang something or you brung something to someone?
I feel like that would be like I feel like I've heard it, but I feel like I feel like it'd be incorrect, but people are just starting to say it. That's like what I would think personally.
Yeah, like I had to catch myself because I read this, on a forum somewhere, and someone said like I brung it to a party, and like obviously in spelling you would never say brung or brang, and it would be like a kind of non-standard way of saying brought. And I was just thinking to myself, like, do I say that, and do Canadians say it? But it's really, you'd have to have like a really long conversation and be thinking about it to even find it out if people said it like that. Because I think I do hear it, but I'm not really sure if I would ever use it.
Yeah, and I think it's little difference like that. Like I know when I go to Toronto, people like I hear, like I almost not really hear, but it feels different how people are speaking. And people will ask me where I'm from when I'm in Toronto.
Really?
People ask me, are you from here? They always ask me.
Interesting. Yeah, I heard like a huge accent when I came back to Canada from Ireland. I was like, oh my God, we sound exactly like the Americans think we do. So it's just like when your ears get completely like out of tune to what you think it is.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, anyway, let's wrap it up.
Yes.
Wow, still a lot of people watching live, but we'll wrap it up. It's gone long enough, and I know you only had 30% battery on your laptop.
Yeah,
so
I'm at 13, so it's time to go.
time to cut it off. Sounds good. Well, thanks for coming on. It was a lot of fun. All of Dana's social links are in the description as per usual when I bring someone on. And also what I'll do, and I guess when is the video that we did on your channel going up? Do you know, or not sure?
We'll look at my schedule. I could probably do it next Friday or the Friday after that.
So in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I'll let you know, and we can let everybody know when it's.
Yeah. Well, go check out Dana's YouTube. There's a video with me on her channel in the next, few weeks or so it'll come out. So you'll see that. But
awesome.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
All right. See ya, guys.